That guy wins. He's winning. I'm glad that none of you were excited to see me. So thank you very much, and I'll see you next year. It's great. It's awesome. Well, it's 8:40 in the morning, which is about midnight in Los Angeles. And so if I say anything which is particularly more stupid than I would normally say, I'm going to blame that on the jet lag. And it's the first time I've done a morning keynote speech, which means that you guys must be wide awake. I can see a very, very active audience right now. Everybody looks bright-eyed and bushy-tailed from their singing last night and their train ride. Yeah? Everyone's good? Is anybody awake? Everyone's... So I thought, as you're all, into science, we could spend the next hour just analyzing this graph, right? Because I figured you've had your coffee, there's lots of energy, and there's a couple of you who right now are going, oh, I had no idea he was going to do this. This is great. A few of you are like, shut up, including myself. This is me with slightly better hair on the left there. I really want that hairstyle again. I was told my hair is not far off, but I was one of those students who was very annoying. I was the kind of student that when you... if you were a parent and you dropped your children off at school, they would all go outside and, wave goodbye, and then they would come back and they would all look through the window and they would check that their children weren't sitting next to me. And if they were sitting next to me, they would tap on the window, go, get away from him, move, go, and they would just, go, don't sit next to him, he'll distract you. I really wasn't interested in what was going on inside the classroom. In fact, I did everything I possibly could to be outside. That was where I felt was my, my sort of, my home, the place I wanted to be. And pretty evident from my report here, my French report, a whopping great 6 out of 30. This test result is really very disappointing, but not totally surprising. It's amazing how teachers have that tone, right? They can write like that. He tries to give off the impression that he's working, but he's unsettled, distracting to others, and doesn't seem to take his work seriously. It's obvious that he didn't do much study. What a pity. It's true. I wasn't going to lie. That's exactly what happened. But I was that curious student, and that curiosity afforded me this, this opportunity to come and, talk to audiences like you and be in some really fascinating environments. And people often say to me, what do you call yourself? What are you? And I love this Einstein quote because I always think that sort of, sums me up, basically saying that I'm just passionately curious. I've built my career off asking questions and being curious and being that annoying kid in school every day of my life. I don't think I've quite grown up, which is very annoying for a lot of my colleagues who I work with. They often ask me to sort of, they are the ones now sending me outside. But that allowed me to go around. This is me in 2004. I did kite across Antarctica. It took us 100 days to do that on these huge power kites that were experimental kites that we were trying out for a company. What it looks like there is, we were trying to land these things, and they never landed properly. And you'd be, just as you thought you'd put it down safely, it would pick you up and throw you across the ice. A lot of fun. This was up in the North Pole, 2006. I tried to take 16 dogs from Russia to Canada. I spent about 110 days from February all the way through to early July. At that point, the water and the ice was pretty. There's lots of open leads, and I remember our logistics team saying, we're no longer able to get you guys out, so you're on your own. So at that point, we decided about 100 miles off the coast of Canada after being on this epic journey, having to stop this adventure. And I think that was one of the that was a tipping point for me in terms of, having adventures that were, I guess in a way, pretty selfish, right? Because you're a few people and you're going to an environment and then you come back and you're telling people, this is what I did. And it's very sort of, in a way, it's very abstract. And I remember coming back and people asking me about the North Pole, and I'd been there for 110 days, and there I was, and I came back, and I'd had a few hot showers and a few pints of beer, and slept in a bed, and had some fun with, gone out and sort of relaxed a little bit after living in a tent for that long, and you completely disconnect. And I remember thinking to myself, if I, who have been in that environment find it hard to connect to the issues that are outside, the issues that are very important that we're talking about, then it's not surprising that when we try and tell the message, it's getting lost. We did a big project down in the Amazon as well. That was a fascinating place to be. Has anyone here been to the Amazon? Great, a couple of people, which is good, so I can totally lie about what goes on down there. It's an incredible place. It is, one of these places, and we found this was built, this goes up, this is about 700-800 foot, this observation platform that was built by the Achuar, the community that we were with, and you climb up this platform to go up to the top of the canopy to look out over what is just like a massive piece of broccoli. And imagine it's literally, you're this tiny little character on this huge bit of broccoli. That is the Amazon. So you don't need to go now. So back in 2007, I'm continuing all these adventures, and I'm starting to think about, well, as I said, I'm out there, conversations out there, come back into these environments, try and discuss what's going on, and find that there's a disconnect. So we started to think about how do we build conversations around issues that we all have an impact on every single day, that we can really touch, that we can really smell and taste and see. We live in a world of tactility. We live in a world of sort of what's in front of us. Everything we can touch and taste, we react with. We're very reactionary. And a lot of the environmental science is put into terminology that is very abstract for a lot of laymen. It's a lot of chemistry. It's a lot of, tons of carbon. It's a lot of data, right? What's a ton of carbon taste like? What does it look like? What does it smell like? What does it feel like? All the senses that we have, that we use to engage with what's in front of us in the context, the climate, is dissipated because it's just crunched out as data. And it makes it very hard to assimilate. The one thing, though, that we all do every single day and that we all come into contact with is waste, our waste footprint. And so back in 2007, around that, 2006, 2007, I started thinking, what happens if we build an adventure around waste? How would that change the conversation when we finish the adventure and during the adventure? Because it's all something that we contribute to every single day. It's all something we touch. We can see it. We can see it right now. We'll get up from here. There'll be a couple of papers on the floor, some bottles, some this and that. It's all around us. So we can make a choice. We can pick something up. We can put it into a certain bin. We can use a certain object in a different way. So this conversation started, could I make a boat entirely out of plastic bottles? And this was back in 2006. And this guy, Buckminster Fuller, is a real hero. Does anyone know Buckminster Fuller here? I'm sure a few of you as engineers, yeah, a few people. Well, he was a very smart man, much smarter than me. That's why that's his quote and not my quote. And I think this is something that we could all apply to every single day, and every interaction that you have is dare to be naive. It's very easy to make the assumptions that we have everything dialed in, we know what we're doing, and especially in this space, there's a lot that we can learn, but a lot of the time it's the fear that stops us from unlearning, right? It's the fear of getting it wrong. And there's a great guy called Sir Ken Robinson, who's a very prolific TED speaker. And to summarize, he basically says, if you go into a classroom of children, 3-year-olds, and you ask them who can dance. Actually, let's just try it here. Who could dance? Who can sing? Well, obviously no one. We saw the video. No, I'm joking. Who can draw? Right? So basically, on all fronts, there's only a few hands went up. If you went into a group of 3-year-olds or 5-year-olds and asked them in school, so who could sing, everyone would put their hand up. Who can dance, everyone would put their hand up. Everybody in the room would be saying, I want to dance, I want to sing, I'll sing and dance and draw all at the same time, right? So what does this teach you is that as we get older, we get more afraid. We become more afraid of making mistakes, of being wrong, of trying things that we don't necessarily know, because we're creatures of habit, right? We like to be inside of our comfort zone. And so within the space that we all operate in, we have to be the people who break out of that comfort zone. So daring to be naive, I think, is a very good lesson. And that was definitely, I'd never, built a boat, and here I was saying I want to build one out of plastic bottles. And what we ended up doing was going out, and was living in San Francisco, and we collected, that's 12,500 bottles up in the top there, in the top corner. We had to collect these from the trash, and we started to clean these, and we started to try and figure out a way in which we could put these bottles into a frame that was also made of plastic bottles, because the only thing that I had said during the conversation to the teams that I was working with was that the bottles had to be in their original form and they had to function. That was the only brief we had. So we couldn't just melt them down. So they have to be in that form up top, and then they had to operate in a way that would keep the vessel afloat. So we had to figure out a way in which we could frame this and keep the vessel not from obviously falling apart. We didn't want to put plastic bottles in the ocean. We had to try and find stability from what, as an individual thing, was pretty unstable. A bottle by itself was pretty unstable. But when we started conversations and started working with designers, I started working with an architect, actually, called Michael Paulin. We started working together, and the first place we obviously looked was nature, right? So we started to look around inside of nature to figure out what could we learn. And we looked at the way nests are built from birds. We looked at, actually, the pomegranate was the thing that we fell upon. Does everyone know a pomegranate, the fruit? Very tough fruit. When you cut it open, inside you have all the pith and you have all the individual seeds. And when they're all packed together, you get this very tough fruit that can float and holds its form. If you take out one of those seeds and you put your finger on it, it just goes or shoots across the room, and it squashes. And it's a bit like this with the bottle. So the pomegranate was actually how we built the entire hull based upon that design of packing it into a structure. And we looked at multiple things, multiple areas within inside of nature, to end up creating a vessel that we could then try and take across the Pacific. This was our route. This was our ambition, was to go from San Francisco to Sydney. There's a lot more circles in there than you would believe. That was the fast route, right? If we actually mapped it, it would have made you dizzy. But our mission was to try and sail from San Francisco to Sydney to highlight the fact that there was so much pollution occurring in our oceans. There's lots of data about the amount of plastic in our oceans. A lot of it you can just make up. Why? Because nobody really knows. We read articles. I'm sure you've seen, everyone always comes up to us and says, what about this 19-year-old boy who's going to build a raft and it's going to suck all the plastic out, and hasn't he solved it? No, we haven't solved the problem. The problem still exists. It's still going. We're still putting massive amounts of materials into our ocean, inorganic materials into our ocean every single day. It isn't a floating island. You can't stand on it. Most of the stuff that gets in our ocean sinks. A lot of the other stuff that gets in it photodegrades down to a molecular size level, which makes it far more ominous. If you're a chemist, you'll understand that the plastic attracts the toxins in the ocean. They sit in the life layer of the ocean, which is where the light can still penetrate the surface of the ocean. This is the depressing bit of the talk. The light can penetrate the ocean. All the little guys that live in that part of the ocean, what we call almost like the engine room of the ocean, the arthropods and the salps, the guys who basically they swim around like little hoovers, and they're the bottom of the food chain, and they're sucking in microflecks of plastic that then work their way back up into the food chain. So when you're eating your fish, or even if you're eating meat, people often go, how does that work? Because a lot of factory farm meat is fed fish meal. You are being exposed to chemicals that had probably come from runoff, from a spill, from some source on land. Maybe it's even at sea where we get people dumping stuff into the ocean, and that's attracted to the plastic. So it's a big problem, not just from the birds and the wildlife that are having to ingest these things and choking on plastic, but as a human element, as a human health issue, there is a massive problem for plastics. We had built this boat with the idea that we would be a floating communication tool. It took us 4 years to build the boat, and we realized that ultimately, we weren't going to be able to go the direction we wanted to go. We were going to basically be sitting on this boat and hope, we had to sort of try and, we could only sail downwind. Are there any sailors in the room? Yeah, a few of you. Great, this is a great audience. This is the most perfect audience because you can just make stuff up because there's a very small percentage of, not a very knowledgeable group. I'm surprised. I'm joking. There's an issue if you can only go downwind. You can't really direct where you're going. You're following the line of the wind. So what we realized very early on was that actually we were a message on the bottle. Our whole mission was to try and create as much conversation. So we would sit, this is us on board, and we would stream live. This was actually streaming live one time into Times Square in New York, talking to kids around the world about the issues. We had this incredible journey. It lasted 4.5 months pretty much at sea. This was a typical view out of the window, drying our clothes, sitting on the back, some of the crew there. Bit hot and sweaty. You're on rotation. You're constantly, awake. The boat's constantly moving. You don't really sleep a lot. You're getting very tired. You're getting very, I guess, angry and grumpy. Cabin fever sets in. And at some point, you sit there and go, what's it all for? No one really cares anyway. We're all at home sitting there going, those idiots are out there bobbing around. We'll pick it up when they get to shore, So this is, a look. Sounds like we're getting shot by a computer. This is underneath the vessel. These are some shots from, as you can see the boat was made entirely underneath the bottom of the vessel with those bottles that took us across this incredible ocean. 29% of our planet is the Pacific. And so we would sit on the back of this vessel and bob around, and finally when we arrived, we'd created this, what I thought was a fantastic message. I was like, this is great. We've created this incredible conversation. What have we achieved? And, everyone was, super excited. And this was actually the moment we stepped off the boat. That's me in my pink hat. And I think they were like, what do you think? And I was like, I think I need to go to the loo and then I'll have a conversation with you. It was the first thing I think I said. But we built this incredible narrative at a time when plastics in the ocean weren't really being discussed. We went from a very crazy idea to making the list of Time magazine as one of the 50 best innovations of the year alongside the plastic heart and the iPad, which is kind of like, way, and that was a highlight. You're like, yay, look, we've done it, problem solved, right? You think, okay, we can go home and move on to another issue. No. And this is really the crux of why I think we're all here. I sat on the back of that boat for many hours, as you can imagine, thinking about what's going on, what's the state of our planet. There's nothing more humbling than being on the back of a boat, looking at the endless horizon, realizing how small we are, realizing how fragile we are, and realizing how disastrous it is, the impact that we have on our planet every day. There used to be an intentionality to our destruction. We used to hunt and gather. Yet today, we are killing the whole time. We're at war with nature. I like to call it death Jenga. Imagine, does everyone know this game Jenga? It's a great game, yeah? It's amazing. More people know this game Jenga than all the other questions I've asked you. It's good. It's a fun group. So, Jenga, as you know, when you pull out the little blocks, the tower falls down if you get it wrong. And in a way, this is how I look at the systems on our planet. We are pulling things, species, and we're pulling systems apart, and we don't know what those bricks are. We're not even questioning them. We're losing more species today than we've even documented, right? And we're pulling them out, and we don't know at which point that thing wobbles over and collapses. And that, to me, was a really scary thought. It was like, how, as an intellectual species, which is very debatable, the word intellectual species, how are we allowing this to happen? That was the question. And I look at it in this context of that we're currently facing what I call a nature emergency. And how do we get to the next stage? And there's 5 stages for analyzing grief and suffering. This is the Kubler-Ross model. And I think it's quite interesting because you can use it, I think, for more than just obviously suffering and grief, but you could actually use it to apply to the conversation we have with the environmental movement. First stage is denial. We know we've been through that. We know there is still some denial, right, in some sectors. We all know that sometimes we get angry. We all know that sometimes we bargain. Maybe if I make this choice, should I do it? I'm not sure. We're all at that point. I'm sure inside your own sectors, your own industry, there's always that bargaining. Should I do it? What are the upsides? What are the downsides? Then you get to a point where sometimes you just get depressed and you go, God, I'm not sure if it's really making a difference. I'm not sure if the mountain I'm trying to climb I can reach. And finally, if we can get through to acceptance, then we start to act. And this, I think, is representative from the media standpoint. This is represented from industry standpoint. This is represented from an individual standpoint. I know I go through every single one of those stages at some point. Some points I get angry. I get angry at the green movement as much as I get angry at the businesses that are doing something bad, for the environment. I get depressed about the scale of things. Sometimes I'm totally in denial. I'm like, yay, the planet's fine, woo, just, and go around my everyday life. Other times, I sit down and go, I've got to do something about it. I can't stop, and I accept it. And I think that's a fair way to look at this. And I try and refine that by saying, how do we give nature a voice? We live on this planet with so many other species. We are part of nature, yet we have completely drowned out nature's voice through the way we act, the way we consume, the way we move, the way we live, the way we engage. We have totally disconnected ourselves. And I think part of the problem has been us as environmentalists, people who really have just become the sort of undertakers for nature. What we do is we stand on stage and do this. Nature is dying. You never see the news. It's not like 10 o'clock news, today we just found a huge forest and there was a whole discovery of new species. It's never like that, is it? It'd be great if it was, but it's not. We constantly hear the bad news. We are the purveyors of that bad news. And that, in some way, just pushes it back. You go back to that chart and you go into anger and denial and despair. And every single day, my pocket vibrates, I look at my phone, there's another thing. It's a disaster, it's an earthquake, it's a landslide, it's another flood, it's another fire, it's another species loss. All on our watch, right? There's 5 white rhinos left. 5. One of them now is in Kenya. The only one that's sort of actually in the wild, is in a reserve in Kenya, with 3 full armed guards standing next to it. Gone. That species is gone on our watch. Big guy, not a little guy, not one of those little ones who are like, oh God, I wish, why don't mosquitoes just disappear, right? That'd be nice. It's always the nice cuddly ones that have to go first. Why? Because they're top of the food chain. And if you look at when collapse happens, it's the things at the top that go first, right? And so you have to think about where we are. A big part of obviously giving nature a voice is the climate conversation, and I think this is quite telling, right? Is that there was a spike, right? Interestingly enough, around the last big crash, there was a spike. Everything's connected, right? This shows you where people are having these conversations, and then you can also start to see that actually it's starting to tail off again. There's a lot. I speak to journalists in this field often, and there's a lot of conversations that they don't want to have. They want to make it into a drama, right? Everything needs to be a drama. Come on, give us some big headline, or we're not interested. Give us a story that someone is doing something really bad. It's not actually a conversation that's consistent. It's cyclical. We build up the green thing, and then we build it down again. We find the winners, we find, and the losers. And that's not really conducive of a conversation that needs to be consistent. The conversation is also being disrupted. I think this is quite interesting. The other day, I was invited to go onto a show in America to talk about Hurricane Gonzalo. So I get a phone call from NBC saying, will you come on the show in 2 hours? There's a hurricane about to hit Hawaii. We'd love your opinion. I thought, God, they must be desperate. Must be scraping the bottom of the barrel. So I thought, well, let me see what's new about Hurricane Gonzalo. So I put in Hurricane Gonzalo on one side, and I got a raft. As you can see, you can't probably see that well unless you're squinting, but it looks a bit, but you have to believe me that on that side, you can see there's just a litany of stuff. There's images of the hurricane, blah, blah, blah. I then put in, 10 seconds later, Hurricane Gonzalo climate change, right? Same search, nothing. Not a single reference to this hurricane, right? So then you start to think, well, what's going on? Well, we're still having a debate. We're still creating misinformation, right? Protecting the planet is everybody's job. And they're right. But it was much better when they were more honest. I love this. This is an old one from the 70s. This says, each day, Humboldt supplies enough energy to melt 7 million tons of glaciers, right? That was awesome. At least they were honest. Because right now, it's like, yay, we're protecting the planet. And look, there's a cute, cuddly little, that thing's probably sitting there with his ears going, piss off. You're killing the planet, right? That was honest. But this is us, right? We are sleepwalking into this disaster. because we've externalized nature. As I said, we created this false dichotomy that nature's over here and we're over here. We've moved ourselves outside of the realm of nature. We are somehow bigger than nature. We can control it. We like to control it. We look at it over there, and we engage in it. I do the same. I mean, it's funny. It's like my career is built on nature. Everything's built on nature, right? I always laugh in America. People hike. I don't think we hike in Europe. Do we hike in Europe? Not as much. I mean, hiking here is proper hiking. It's in, you get up the mountains and hike. In Europe, in America, if you're putting on anything with Gore-Tex in, you're hiking. You could be walking down the road here, and everyone's on a hike. You know what I mean? It's like, I'm going hiking. I'm like, you're walking. That's not hiking. Go to Europe. Check out what's going on over there. But it's interesting to me that this, taken from the Webster's Dictionary, is the external world in its entirety. I find that fascinating, that we just perceive it to be out there, but that was us at one point at the back. And what's happened with all this connectedness is that we're moving into an age what I call of relativism, where we're seeing things and we don't like them, and we just go, right, well, don't like this. And then we go back to our everyday life, right? Campaigns come and go. How many times do you see another friend going online and it's a Facebook thing or it's an email newsletter, sign your name, sign a petition, and how many of you have just clicked on something without really reading it, going, I just need to do that because it's my friend? How many of you have done that? Wow, I'm the only one in here, am I? Come on. We've all done it, right? We all get overwhelmed. There's always a thing, and it comes in, and you think, oh, God, I must do one thing, and they're going to track me, and they're going to... And so what I feel is happening is we are more connected. We can hear all these bad stories, but yet we're not connected in the context of actually doing something, right? Green's become a super color, yeah? It's just a super color everywhere. If you put green on something, they did a study recently on the color, and they put 2 chocolate bars on the shelf. One had a green label, one had a red label. 60% of people went for the green label because they thought it was healthier, right? So we know that. We know that Fiji water, every drop is green, is not true. I think they took a little bit of a hint from us and built a boat out of plastic bottles underneath. And I love this. This is the American green dream right there, is the Hummer with eco-smart water, right? I mean, that is the dream. So how, let's put it into context. We're just trying to show you how we're losing context with giving nature a voice, how our supposed activism, right, is really panning out for us. Our supposed desire to change things. This is in Asia. Let's not worry about the pollution. We'll just take a photograph on a clear day, and you can stand in front of the photograph and imagine it was clear because you were kind of there, and it all kind of works, and you can't necessarily see what's going on. Otherwise, it's brilliant, isn't it? I mean, that, again, sums it up. And we laugh, but we're all connected, right? I talk about it in the context of saying we're living with an outdated brain model. And what I mean by that is that we're more afraid of evolutionary fears. They're much harder to extinguish those evolutionary fears than modern fears. So we're much more afraid of camping in the woods than losing the woods. We're much more afraid of being bitten by a snake than we are of losing that species. And the same applies when you get into the realms of chemistry, for example, right? Because we don't know yet what the reactions and the actions are of some of those chemical reactions. We know a lot of them in individual instances, but when you start to cross-pollinate chemistry and take it outside of the lab and let it filtrate into the atmosphere, in the ocean, the air, the food, we start to get into even harder ground to start understanding how to deal with that problem, because it's invisible and it's completely counterintuitive to how we operate. We operate flight and fight. If I can't see something, but yet it's harming me, how do I react to it? I want to try this one. This is always a fun one, just to reiterate my point. Say BlackBerry. How many of you thought this? How many of you thought that? Right? Again, it just talks to where we're moving. The business of nature. This guy on the left is $1 million dog. Big red, right? $1 million. It's a Tibetan Mastiff. Why? Because of his bloodline. He's bred distinctly related to a breed of hunting dog, and it's the purest form, and it commands a high price. This tuna on the right was about $1.2 million in the fish market. Again, we command a high price for nature. Why is it that much? It was a bit of a stunt by a sushi restaurant owner, but it was also a sign that those big guys in our oceans, the panda bears of our oceans, I call them, they are starting to disappear and commanding a good price. And it's in people's interest. The nature effect takes hold across marketing, right? We use it where it's convenient. This one was actually a real ad on the top there from Diesel, Global Warming Ready in New York. Came out not too long after Sandy hit. I mean, it's quite on the nose. And then we can do better, right? When it comes to actually looking at food, for example, right? So on the left here, we've got the salmon chart. If you don't want your salmon a certain color, we can dye it for you. This person realized that actually a watermelon is very awkward to pack on the shelf. Got a point. So let's make them square, you know? And this one I love. This is Del Monte. I'm sorry if anyone works with Del Monte in here. But let's be honest. This is kind of, again, a great example. A banana has intelligent skin, right? It's the smartest thing out. It can show you when it's not ready. It shows you when it's perfectly ready to eat, and it shows you when it's overripe. It's got intelligent skin that can inform you. But we can do it better. We're going to single wrap it in biodegradable wrapping and then win an award for green wrapping. It's a true story. Look it up online. And I love this one on the end. You know, it's like feathers, right? We don't need feathers if we're going to pluck it, so we'll just grow chickens without feathers. This is the ocean dome in Japan, right? It's actually shut now, but if you look in the top corner, there's a real ocean. So once you've gone for a swim inside of the dome, you can go and look at the real ocean from outside. And the list goes on, right? It goes on and on and on. When we do studies in school, kids are more likely to name brands than they are species, right? That, to me, becomes a scary thought. This is us. This is where we operate. This is taken from under Saturn's rings over 1 billion kilometers away. There's nothing else out there. Not that we know. We are on Spaceship Earth, as Buckminster Fuller said. We are out there, right? That really is out there. Everywhere else kind of sucks out there. Your eyes pop out of your head. You can't breathe the air. You'll combust in seconds. There's nothing like this place, right? Literally, you know, there's nothing like the place that we live on, planet Earth. And it was summed up, I think, beautifully by Buckminster Fuller when he said it has to be everybody or nobody. This was in 1963 when he said this. This was actually 5 years before Earthrise, when they looked back, that famous shot that was taken from the window on the Apollo mission, when they looked back and saw the moon, the Earth lit by the sun. And we realized for the first time we were on a spaceship, really realized we were on a spaceship. And he said it has to be everybody or nobody. Our fate is common. And I kind of think about our spaceship in a way, and nature in a way, as if we're sitting on an airplane and the crew is nature. And yet, we're starting to see the crew members die. We're starting to see maybe smoke come out of the engine. And all we're doing is pressing the ding-dong button and asking for more champagne or more nuts, or my seat doesn't go back far enough, right? And we're letting this go on around us. And so it has to be shared interest. It has to be everybody or nobody. It's a way what I'm trying to start right now, and is partly why I'm here, is finding people. I call it collective consciousness. Call it what you want. I call it shared interest. I call it being part of something that's bigger than yourself. I've started a new journey, and that journey is to try and figure out how I can do more as an individual, more than just maybe the selfish pursuit of being an adventurer, but actually start to take the next step and start to actually have more interaction with individuals, with you and other people out there who are interested to get involved. It's interesting. I'm fortunate I got invited here really off the back of and I'm going to say thank you to the team at Scholler and to Peter. And I started talking to them about what I was obsessed with, and I was obsessed with nature. And I'm obsessed with biomimicry. And I'm obsessed with this idea of how do we take the next step. And that's why I'm interested to learn from you guys, and I'm interested to stand here and say, all the things I've showed you, they're kind of funny, but they're not really, right? Because we have externalized nature, because we have pushed ourselves outside of the web of life, because we have started to disconnect and cover up all these issues. But to really learn and understand how nature can play a role, how do we use what we know, especially within the field of chemistry, to change the way that we consume, to change the way that we make, to change the way that we think, right? That has got to be where we start, and there's nothing better than having 4.5 billion years of R&D sitting in your back, yard. We should look at nature as a lesson book, not looking at nature as something that we can just have as and when we want, as we can Photoshop in or create a fake environment. We need to look at it as something that we can actually engage with in a meaningful way. And that's why the whole sort of, biomimicry piece. Oh. I'm going to jump into, this is what I've, started to think about when we started developing a relationship, with Scholler. I was fascinated by this idea that you could take, this is obviously duck feathers, right? And this idea that you can repel water looking at duck feathers. Why wouldn't you be able to do that, right? Or you could take a fir cone and look at how it opens and closes, right? I mean, I'm sure to you guys, you're like, yeah, big deal, we've got this all dialed in. To me, I was like, this is amazing, right? There is opportunity. How many people in here are working within the field of biomimicry? How many people know? What's one guy? How many people know the phrase biomimicry? So you all know it, and how many people would like to do more with biomimicry, more with nature, working in harmony with nature? How many of you just don't want to do anything and get coffee? You're going, shut up, get on with it. But this is what, for me, this has become, right? Is how do we start to look at ourselves as human nature? How do we start to re-engage ourselves back into the conversation, right? How do we start to design for systems, not for seasons? How do we start to look at systems and the doctrine of signature of those systems and recognize what could be applied to those systems, right? How do we start to look and say, this isn't about seasonal designs, this isn't about just throwing things out, this is actually about creating conversations that last, that can learn and can inform and can provide the right service and the right platform for whatever it is the service you're providing without damaging nature, right? And I like this. We were messing around with some photography. This is obviously merino wool, but look at how, when you look at it like that and you go, it's representative of the mountains. Where does merino come from? The mountains, right? The mountainous environment. There's a doctrine of signature right there. It's sitting in front of us. That's what's so fascinating to me. That we're sitting with all this information in front of us, yet we're not often engaging with it because we're too busy, we don't want to see it, maybe the structure that we're in doesn't allow us to see it, doesn't allow us to be curious, going back to the very beginning. We don't want to be wrong. So I'd leave you just with that thought of saying, don't worry, can't really read that, but don't worry about being wrong. Because the only way you learn is when you find out what it isn't. Right? The only way you're going to move forward and create the next thing that is going to have the biggest impact possible is by making mistakes and is by shared values. And these are just some thoughts about how to, always be looking. Consider everything alive and animate. Everything is interesting, look closer. Alter your course. Observe for long durations. Notice the stories going on around you. Notice patterns and make connection. Document your findings. So on and so on. I'm running out of time. This thing's flashing at me. So I just leave it to say, go out there, go get lost. Thank you for listening to me this morning. Sorry I'm running over time.